So if you are a guest or returning after being gone for a while, we are in a really 6-month series called You Asked For It. And it's going to go through the end of the year with topics that have been submitted by people from this class. The month of June has been about dating. And today is the last day in that series on dating. Next Sunday, we're going to start talking about things we believe in Churches of Christ and why we believe what we believe. That's been a topic submitted by a lot of people. But today we're finishing up on dating. If you have not seen part 1, 2, or 3, they're on our Discover Young Adults YouTube page. Thank you, Craig, who's in Washington, D.C. today. But we've talked about the type of person I should date. That was part 1. Part 2 was the type of person I should dump, the relationship I should get out of. Part 3 last week was conversations we need to have before we get to the altar. And today is kind of the last resort. If there are problems, these are the problems you need to recognize before you get married, and I would recommend ending the relationship before the marriage begins. That's why we're calling it red, not yellow flags. This is not slow down. This is stop. You are approaching a pretty serious situation. Obviously, we're all very familiar with the idea of the traffic stop. Red, yellow, green. Not all drivers understand what those lights mean, especially in Dallas-Fort Worth. But universally, we recognize red, stop, yellow, slow down, green, free to go. We're not talking about things you need to slow down for today. We're talking about things where you really need to stop because you're approaching very dangerous territory. I was thinking about it driving in this morning. 2 Saturdays ago, Suzanne and I were in the car. We were in Mesquite over by our house. We were leaving the car wash where we get our cars washed. And we were pulling out. It's like Galloway and 635. That's irrelevant. But we were sitting at a red light. And there was one car about to head north. And there was another car coming from the west. And the car coming from the west was a small car. And the car headed north was a big truck. And we were sitting there at the stoplight, and we saw what was about to happen. It was one of those deals, if you've ever felt like, yourself falling, and you realize, I'm about to hit the ground. The time between hitting the ground and realizing there's a problem can seem like a really long time. Have you ever been in that situation? So we're sitting there in the car, and we see that this wreck is about to happen. And to me, it felt like a long time. And enough time passed that even Suzanne said, oh no, like we saw what was about to take place. And sure enough, this car T-boned this truck. And we sat there and we watched the whole thing happen right before our eyes. And I think everyone was okay, but the car was definitely totaled. The truck did not look great, but it was a big truck, and he got out the other side and started to help the person who had kind of gone up underneath his truck in their little Prius. But when you think about it with relationships, when people don't stop, there's always going to be a wreck. There's always going to be some type of destruction. And I really do believe that God gives us the intuition. He gives us a conscience. He gives us the ability, if we use it, to see that there's a wreck coming. And maybe other people see it. Maybe you're blind to it when you're in the middle of it, when you're in the relationship and you want something to work out that doesn't need to work out. You may be in denial about it, or you may just ignore it because you don't want to accept it. But I think God gives you the ability to see there's a problem on the horizon here, and if I go any forward or any further with this, there's going to be a big problem. There's going to be a wreck. There's going to be some destruction. And so that's kind of the purpose of this final lesson in this series, is to see when the wreck's coming and don't have the wreck. Because you're going to bring a lot of pain into your life if you keep going. Now, I just want to throw this out here. I think it's only appropriate. These are some disclosures. So you know this is Jacob talking. This is not universal truth. So I want to kind of protect myself and also let you know this is one man's opinion. You can take it or leave it. But here are some disclosures getting started. There is a chance, albeit small chance, but there is a chance that some relationships can succeed even though you see some warning signs. If I were you, I wouldn't want to see if one of those success rates or not, because it's a small chance. But I don't want you hearing me saying today that it'll never work if you see these problems. There's a small chance. But you have to kind of weigh the risk versus the reward, because the risk is much, much higher. Secondly, these are my personal evaluations. You don't have to agree with me on this. I'm sure some of you won't, but I would encourage you to use your own wisdom, your own discernment to figure out if the situation or relationship that you may be in right now or one day might be in is a good or healthy thing. You need to use your own set of experiences there. And finally, this goes without being said, but while you're dating, you still have the freedom to get out of the relationship. Once you get married, once vows have been made to God, it is much more complex. It is much more difficult. It is much more expensive. And it's much more painful. Recognize that. Now's the chance to get out. Once you say I do before God and before people who have gathered, it's not as easy. And there's a lot more pain around the corner. So with those disclosures being said, let's go forward. Here are some red flags that I think we all need to be watching for. I'm married, so I'm not watching for them anymore. But if you're dating someone, if you're getting serious about someone, if you see some of these red flags surface, recognize them for what they are. These are not, let's slow down and consider this some more. In my opinion, these are some serious warnings. Serious warnings that could be leading to a very devastating wreck or destruction in your life. Number one, if you're in a relationship with someone and you are constantly fighting while you're dating, that is a red flag. Disagreements do not always have to turn into big fights. Now, this sounds elementary, but you've got to take some time and evaluate the relationship. What are we fighting about, and why are we fighting all the time? Are these big things or are these small things? Because if you find yourself disagreeing about the small things all the time and them turning into pretty big fights, what you're doing is you are uncovering, you as a couple, your inability to work through some pretty serious conflict. Because if you can't get along in the small things that don't need to turn into fights, when you start having some serious disagreements or serious challenges, how are you going to handle it then? It's okay to have a disagreement. It's not okay for every disagreement to turn into a fight. And that doesn't mean that either one of you are bad people. Doesn't mean that at all. It just means your personalities don't mix very well. And you need to be aware of that. Because if you really can't get along while you're dating, it's going to be very difficult for you to have harmony once you're married. This passage in 1 Corinthians 7 is really in a chapter about divorce, but Paul does make the statement, God wants you to live in peace. He doesn't want your life to be full of conflict. And if you are having all kinds of conflict before you get married, I guarantee you're going to have it once you get married. So dating's kind of that time to figure out, can we get along or are we constantly arguing about things? Number two, constant criticism. If you're in a relationship and you hear the other person always tell you, you could have done that better, do you want to sign up for a life of someone always telling you that you could have been better than you were? Kind of what Curtis was saying a little bit. Is there some validity to you could have been better? Of course there is, because we can all do better. But if you hear that all the time, are you tracking with me? If you hear that in the dating stage, you have no clue how much you're going to hear that in the marriage stage. You don't want to sign up for a life of someone always telling you, hey, you should have done a better job. Or why don't you work harder? Why don't you give more of yourself? Why don't you sacrifice more? Or, I really don't think you can do that. I think that's above your ability or that's beyond your skill set. Do you really want to sign up for a life with someone who doesn't believe in you? Now you say, do people really say that to each other? Yeah, they may not use these words, But they may be communicating this. You should be better. You should be further along in life. I don't think you're up for that type of challenge. You want to be with someone who believes in you wholeheartedly, right? And you want to be with someone who thinks that you're gifted, that you're skilled, that you're talented. And if they're not building you up in dating, again, marriage is a lot harder than dating. If they're not building you up while you're dating, they will not build you up once you're married. I promise you. You go back to the story of when God creates man and woman, and one of the main reasons why God creates Eve for Adam is so that Adam can have a helper who is suitable for him. So Eve can have a helper who is suitable for her. These types of conversations are not helpful. They're destructive. They wear you down. They exhaust you. And in the same way, if you're in a relationship where you're constantly arguing, if you're in a relationship where you're constantly being criticized, that is a red flag. That is a wreck that is coming. That is destruction around the corner. And you need to see that for what it is. Okay, number 3. This one gets real complex, but troubled family dynamics. You remember we talked about that last week when we had 2 different opinions, and they're both viable, legitimate opinions. One person says, I want to be as far away from my parents as I can be. Others have said, we want to be close to our parents because we want to have a close family union. One's not more right than the other, but you need to know which one you're getting into. If you're a person who says, I want to be near family, it's going to be really hard to be in a relationship with someone who says, let's go halfway across the country. And vice versa. If you want to be halfway across the country, you're not going to be real happy living in the same suburb. Can you figure that out? Yes, but it's better to figure it out on this side of the altar than the other side of the altar. Some issues, statements when you should say, oh, red flag. What do these statements sound like? If you're in a relationship and someone says, I really don't like your family. Okay. Why do you not like my family? Well, they're really hard to get along with. Like I said, that may be true. Very well might be true. But it's still hard to hear. And if the other person doesn't like your family before they're part of the family, how do you think they're going to feel about the family once they're part of the family? When they see the dirty laundry they haven't seen before. If you're someone who says, I really want to be close to my family, and you're in a relationship with someone who says, I don't like those folks, that's not good. That is a life of disaster waiting for you. Your family doesn't like me. Now, you may be dating someone sometime and you're riding in the car and you have left a family gathering and they speak up and they say, I really don't feel like your family respects me or cares for me. If you're the person dating that person who feels that way, that's not always easy to hear because then you're kind of between a rock and a hard place because you want to be supportive of the person you're dating, but at the same time, you don't want to turn your back on your family. If you hear that, you may need to think to yourself, is my family seeing something I don't see? Because when I'm in this relationship and I'm crazy about this person, I have on blinders and I'm not looking at reality. I'm seeing what I want to see. And the people who've known me much longer than this person I'm dating, maybe who've raised me or who have been my sibling, they know me better than anyone else. And if they see something that's dangerous, I might need to listen to that a little bit. I might need to listen. There might be a red flag here that my family's trying to tell me about that I'm ignoring. We mentioned this kind of in talking in that same chapter, Genesis 2. You have this passage where God says when a man and woman get married, they need to create their own life. We call this the leave and cleave passage, right? For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. They will become one flesh. For some couples, their struggle is leaving and cleaving. One of the individuals want to remain close to the parents. But you also got to realize, Trent and Megan know this, when you marry someone, you aren't just marrying that person, you're marrying their what? Their family. Do I want to be around these people? Is this who I want to spend my life with? Or do I want to ignore them? You shouldn't want someone to take you away from your family, and you shouldn't want them to take you from your family. If so, it'll be a constant source of stress and heartache. Okay, one more, and this one's where we're going to finish. This is by far the most difficult of the four. Blurry convictions of faith. Raise your hand if you've heard the term. It's pretty common in today's world about deconstruction. Deconstructing faith. Okay. I'm going to make a statement here, and this is going to sound kind of bold, and it is bold, but I want you to think about it. If you are in a relationship with someone who is deconstructing their faith, I think, at least for the moment, you need to deconstruct that relationship. Deconstruction, in my estimation, is dangerous. Now, it's built on a healthy idea that I want to break everything down that I've been taught because I want my faith to be my faith. And that's healthy. And that's important. What happens more times than not when someone begins to deconstruct their faith is when they get done with that process, they don't even know what their faith is or what their faith looks like. Because there's some things about faith you'll never be able to make sense of analytically. And deconstruction is very much of an analytical process. That's why they call it faith. Because there's some things we believe that don't make sense on the surface. And we have to choose to believe it. And if someone is in the process of deconstructing their faith, they're not a bad person. I don't think they're wrong. But I would be very hesitant about wanting to spend the rest of my life with someone who doesn't know for sure what they believe. Tracking with me? And that doesn't mean we can't ever get married. I just think it means we can't get married right now until you figure some things out or until you know what you believe for sure. Because there are plenty of matters in life that we can doubt. We can doubt the economy. We can doubt the best way to raise kids. We can doubt where we need to live. We can doubt a lot of things. Faith is something that needs to be secure. And if your faith is not secure, you're not ready to get married if you want to have a Christian marriage. And if the other person's faith is not secure, they're not ready to get married. Can you keep dating? Sure. Should you remain friends? Absolutely. But don't go to the altar until you are both firmly planted in what you believe and what you think is right and what you think is true. I want to throw out there, this does not mean that you can't wrestle with some difficult biblical interpretations. There are some things that I believe now about the Bible that when I first started preaching 15 years ago, I did not hold those convictions. And as time has gone on, as I've matured, as I've thought about things, read other things, listened to other people, I've kind of changed my views on some things that are kind of difficult interpretations to begin with. And I think that's healthy for you to wrestle with things and chew on things and struggle with things. I'm talking about the real big pieces of the Christian faith. I'm talking about the existence of God, the exclusive nature of salvation only in Jesus, the kingdom of God, the church, how we're saved. If you are not on the same page on those things and you enter into a marriage, you are entering into a minefield. Because one day when you have children, if husband believes this and wife believes that, and they're diametrically opposed to each other, and they're both items of faith, what are you going to teach that child to believe? That's not an easy conversation. And so if you are in the process of deconstruction or if someone else is in the process of deconstruction, don't get married yet until you come out on the other side knowing a little bit more about what you believe and what you think about God. Here are just some passages that I think confirm this. You look at John chapter 20, the Apostle John tells us why he wrote the Gospel of John. This was his purpose. Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John says, I wrote this so you can be certain of your faith. That's why this gospel account exists. Don't marry someone who doesn't believe that wholeheartedly. Paul would say in Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jews, then for the Gentile. I'm not ashamed of it. Are you in a relationship with someone who would technically be ashamed of the gospel because they don't know exactly what the gospel is or what the gospel means? Don't turn your back on them. Don't stop talking with them. Be a good example for them. Don't marry them. There's a difference between being a good example and being a good friend and then becoming their spouse. You don't have to do all those things. You can still be a good friend or be a good example without becoming their spouse. One more, 2 Timothy 1:12. Listen to the assurance of the language here in Paul's voice. I am not ashamed, because I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him for that day. You want to be convinced, and you want to marry someone else who is convinced. Not someone who's like, maybe so, maybe not totally sure. If you marry someone like that, it is going to hurt your faith. It will. Now, I said in the beginning, are there stories of people who married someone who is an unbeliever or someone who is on the fence, and that person who is an unbeliever or on the fence became a strong believer? Yes, there are stories like that out there, but they are very much in the minority. Most of the time, the unbeliever has more power on the believer in a long-term relationship. And you need to very seriously consider that before you go to the altar, before you begin a new life. So here are those red flags again. You may have lost number 3 while the roach the size of a hippopotamus climbed the wall. But these are the red flags: constant fighting, constant discouragement, troubled family dynamics, and blurry convictions or faith.